My name is Brian Parks, CEO of JamFactory. Let me start, as always, by acknowledging that we're here on Ghana land and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And it's many of you, I think, were among the crowd on Thursday night last week when we opened the Gold exhibition celebrating our 50th anniversary. Term 3 talks kicking off with Jeff Mincham today. And it's great to have somebody who has witnessed so much of the history of the organisation, reflect on his own practice today. I think that's going to be a real treat for us. Jeff is someone I've known for a long time, and one of the people I knew well, perhaps well-ish, before I moved to Adelaide, and got his opinion about whether it was a good place to come and live or not, and here I am. So thanks so much for agreeing to do this talk today, Jeff. I'm going to leave it straight to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's 45 minutes, and do I need the microphone? Yes. Good. Hang on. Anyone hearing challenge? I'll try and use it. Okay, here we go. Looking around the room, I see many familiar faces. Is there anyone here that has never heard me speak before? Wonderful. The rest of you can go. We're going through an interesting period at the JamFactory. Looking back over 50 years, it gets very boring after a while. And all the stories you'd like to tell, you've sworn never to tell. And the other problem is two people can stand side by side and look at the same thing and see it very differently. So it's a great opportunity though I never thought I'd be doing something like this when I first walked into the JamFactory in a very hot January in 1976. I put this image up to show you where I live. This is the view from my studio window. And I'm conscious that I won't go over time. I can see these seats are a physiotherapist's retirement package. In order to tell the story, I need to tell you where I live. I bought this property at Cherryville in 1977. I've lived there ever since. The studio is there, the house is there. It's 35 minutes, 30 minutes on a good day from the JamFactory and the art gallery and the whole cultural boulevard of South Australia. And it's a very, very fortunate place to live. There's probably only one other city in Australia you can pull that off, and that'd be Hobart. The place I live and work in, I built the studio with my father in the early 1980s. The rafters in my studio, I'm fond of telling people, washed ashore from the Malang jetty. The last time Lake Alexandrina flooded, the jetty fell apart, washed onto my father's property, and we've been using it for all sorts of things ever since. So I'm very much a South Australian and very much rooted in country and rural South Australia. The people often ask me, are there any other artists in your family? Well, in 5 generations, no, there hasn't been, and I doubt anyone's going to be foolish enough to be the next one. I came from a farming background, so that very much, I was going to be a farmer, apparently. And then the farm wasn't going to work due to a drought. What do you want to do with your lives? My father sat me down on the Laminex table in the kitchen, and my brother and I sort of got the message. And my brother went off into civil aviation, and I went to art school. Dad understood civil aviation. Art school is a lot more hesitant about. But I was in a group of people that were at the South Australian School of Art at a very exciting time on Stanley Street. We had great lecturers, and a terrific program. I was part of a thing called the J course, which meant you were getting a teaching qualification as well as an art qualification, which meant you had strong legs because you had to ride a push bike from North Adelaide or over to Western Teachers College, now removed from the planet. Well, the West Theberton Hotel is the only part of that area still standing. We gave it a lot of business. So it was a unique course. I got a sort of a classics kind of history, English, drama, politics type education as well as an art school. And it was an interesting time. I mean, we had great lecturers, but they were very fortunate lecturers because they had great students. We were very enthusiastic, unbelievably so. no more so than the ceramics department, which just didn't have any rules. We just came and went. If they closed the place, we came in the windows at 9 o'clock and they shut it, ostensibly to turn off a kiln. But it was just a great environment to be in. I went from there to the Tasmanian School of Art to complete a fellowship with a man called Les Blakeborough, who was one of the very leading figures in Australian ceramics at the time. Technically, a technical proficiency of a very, very high order that had come somewhat reluctantly into the teaching world, and it was there that I got what I call the real ceramic. You know, I really got the technical and practicing program, or understood my medium at a much higher level. So I was very fortunate. So then came back to South Australia and entered the JamFactory on a very hot January day in 1976, set up a studio and started work. And it's just gone on from there. By 1979, after 2 or 3 attempts at starting a ceramics workshop that had become seriously unravelled, I, as a 29-year-old, was given the job on the grounds that almost nobody else wanted it. This has happened to me a few times in life. So we set about getting this workshop going and building it from the ground up. And as I was saying on Thursday night, if any of you were there, in this beautiful building and the fantastic setup. Well, I walked into the building, the pigeons were nesting in the roof, the rats were eating the pigeon eggs, there was broken glass on the floor, there was water running down the wall, there was a box gutter that you know, it ran like the River Murray. So it was it was just dreadful. But at the time, the crafts movement was taking off and people were so wildly enthusiastic, and I just can't possibly replicate for you the huge amount of enthusiasm. Craft was a deeply dignified word. It was a word that meant intent, and it meant people very, very committed to something and very passionate about it. That's what the word actually meant. The word design wasn't even in the picture. Didn't come around for another 20 odd years. But away we went. Craft organisations were being created all over Australia and here in South Australia, and it was a great proliferation. People that went through the training programs went straight into tin sheds or studios or wherever they could go, started work. There was a craft shop just down the road. There were 40 or 50 of them in South Australia, and away it went. So it was a wildly hedonistic, yes, I know, but it was a wildly enthusiastic time. And I graduated through various stages to wanting to speak to the world as an artist through clay. I wanted to be what we called an artist potter. Sounds awfully pretentious now, but at the time it was a clear statement of fact. I was a potter and I'd worked very hard to be one, and I really wanted to be an artist using that medium to talk to the world. So I duly did. I took on board all sorts of things, and as we go through the images, I'll mention a bit more about it. The landscapes kept coming back and back and back. I viewed it in all sorts of ways, and now I'm at the stage of I consider to be a artistic maturity where it comes up through you. It's not, you don't look at it and, oh yeah, that's a nice bit of sky. You know, there's another thing there, and if you are attuned to that, you can, by dealing with the landscape, have a conversation, send messages, invoke feelings and passions and ideas. So there is a space there that the landscape plays into. I have a sufficient command of my medium. There's one thing about ceramics, there's never such a thing as total command. That will never happen. You just don't live that long. But I guess I've selected out of all the possibilities that are in front of me, the pathway that I can work with that does what I just said I was trying to do. Okay, right. Another view of Cherryville. Some people, Peter here knows Cherryville very well, and these views are from windows in my workshop. The workshop, looking east out that way in the middle of winter. I often get requests to visit my studio, and I tend to avoid it because, well, it's a mess. Well, I know where everything is, but I think. Right. Soon after leaving the JamFactory and getting going, I started working in a medium known as Raku. Raku was often known in the potter's world as the firing process of last resort. If it's stuffed up everywhere else, you've put it in the Raku kiln. It's essentially a low temperature technique. It comes out of Japan. It comes out of Japan in about 1550 and really starts to develop a high degree of interest around 1690, 1700 in the hands of a man called Ogata Kenzan. A low temperature technique, and anyone involved in ceramics here knows exactly what it is. To others of you that don't, essentially it ties into a Japanese philosophy called wabi. And it's about naturalness, it's about ease, it's about spontaneity, it's about letting it happen and learning to recognise when it has. The Raku courses were given in art schools to the first years in the first week, and they learnt to loathe it. You know, they never went back to it. But I took it on, and for 17 years produced pretty much only Raku ceramics. The high point, or the last point, was at the Glasgow School of Art in 1996 with 5 lovely young Glaswegians. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but we had a great time. And we fired in a thing called the Haldane building, and it all worked fine. The unfortunate thing about the Glasgow School of Art, it has a propensity for burning down. But I got out of there without too much trouble. And then I started moving off in another direction. Unfortunately, all my Raku work is trapped in slide format, and it costs money to turn them into this. So this was the only image I could bring you today that showed it. It was quite a big piece. It's owned by Dr. Jeff Heathersay, who some of you may know. He may have even done dental work on some of you. That has all the characteristics of the spontaneity, of the accidental nature of the process. I put this one in because it was a very early piece of Raku, and it was very experimental. It was in the first exhibition that I ever had in October the 3rd, 1976 at the Paynham Road JamFactory. Now, this is sort of Raku on a big scale. This is the view out of my studio window a few years back. Now, I'm showing you these. Simon, wherever you are, in case you missed it, you missed out on this. So there we are. This is how you put it out. You can do all the fire trucks. I was in the CFS for 22 years. Didn't make much difference to any fire that I came across. This is how you do it. These are now some works that followed on from it. Not the actual sort of event, but what changed around me at the time. These are elliptical forms, and I'll keep talking about this as I go along. I'm very fond of the elliptical form because you've got 2 sides and it's not round. The problem with composition on your traditional pot is the image is coming towards you and going away from you. It doesn't ever quite sit still unless you make it. And if you do that, it's a boring pot. So you've got, this is my interest in this particular shape, and I've persisted with it. This, however, nearly a metre high, 92 centimetres high. I've often worked on a large scale, and I like doing it. People say, "Oh, why are your pots so big?" And I don't really know what to say. Just I don't like small pots. I can't really. I think the small ceramic object it fits into people's heads in a different way. I'm in a much more confrontational mode. I want this thing to stand up and look back at you. I want you to feel intimidated by it. This piece is called Sea of Grass. Okay, there's the broad sweep of the landscape. Now for the details. I got this idea driving through Strathalbyn and the hills around there where I grew up. And there was maybe October, a hillside covered in tallish ryegrass, being swept by the wind and swaying and swirling as it does. And that was the start of the idea. How could I turn that into a form? Well, this is the journey. Now, it's got a sort of what I call a hanging foot. There's a space up under there. And that makes a heavy object. It's quite big. A heavy object, less heavy. It floats. It sits there for you. Keen's Special K, if any of you want to know. A very good, tough, rough, wonderful clay. Not for the amateur. It takes a while to learn to handle it. Okay, this piece is called Winter. It was done as a special job for a special exhibition. And here I've got a very complicated family of glazes, which I won't go into, but just to tell you, they're not the ordinary run-of-the-mill glazes. You can't buy them at the pug mill. They are based on a material called Gersley borate, a boron flux that comes from America. It's a beautiful material, and a very large percentage of it is in all my glazes. It started out back in the Raku thing. That was where I started to find out what would happen, what I could do with this stuff. And since then, over the last 25 years, I've got a substantial repertoire of glazes. There's maybe 15 or 20. 4 or 5 are out the back door now. You know, I've improved on that, but there's always more coming. You know, my glaze development attitude is continuous. I keep trying new and different things, and then I find I can put one thing on top of another and get an interesting outcome. And some of these works are fired more than once. Some are actually fired 3 times. Then there's so many glazes on there, I haven't got a clue what I did. And, you know, my wife says to me, "Didn't you write it down?" Well, of course I bloody didn't. So, let's get back one. Okay, we go. Then came a fairly long period of works where I was orchestrating the surface quite deliberately. You can see what I was doing with that spontaneity type thing, that I'd picked it up in Raku and I'd moved it up here, you know, into these other forms. But in this case, I stopped and started to slow the surfaces down, so to speak. And I mean, I might have gone to art school and read a book about Piet Mondrian, but, you know, just by the way. Now, here is a good example of an unsuccessful work with another image put over the top of the result, an amazing outcome. There is a fair bit of this that still goes on. Mind you, there's a fair bit where it doesn't actually work. The loss rate is high. I can't bear losing things. It's not an intolerable loss rate, but you can't get the type of surfaces I want without a failure rate. You know, you're just going to have to live with it. And there's a lot of time invested in the work, sometimes a huge amount of time. Sometimes I'll sit in the studio for 6 months or a year before I think, oh God, I wonder if I slap a bit of that on it. And I haven't, you know, so the works do tend to evolve. I was very fond of these long forms, and I've got another one coming up. Here we go again. Hanging wall bowl. So you can put your finger a couple of inches up underneath there, and it gives the bowl a lovely, graceful, floating sort of effect. I can't float with this. And the insides are terribly important. They're different to the outsides, but related to it. Tricky. In the left here is a tea bowl. This very dramatic piece with the tea bowl. I'd done all this, by the way, before I'd even heard of Sean Scully. I've made a lot of tea bowls over 20 odd years. It's a fascinating thing for me because it reconnects. I think my fundamental aesthetic position is based in Japanese ceramic ideologies. Provocative word, but they are. Oribe, Hagi, Tamba, Bizen, Shino, they all have hundreds of years of tradition, and they thrashed out the aesthetic thing. And it's a truth to material over and over again, but with different interpretations. In other words, the material calls a shot, and what you can do with it is where you go. But there's a truth to the actual bag of clay. They dig up Shigaraki clay, it's full of bits of feldspar and crap, and who would want that? But they do make very, very beautiful things with it. And this surface, this is principally to display this interesting glaze. I use quite a bit of magnesium in my glazes, and the ceramics people here will understand that there's light and heavy, and light magnesium, if used in anything more than 10%, makes the glaze shred and crack and even fall completely off. You can put it on a piece and let it dry out, come back and the glaze is full on the shelf next to it. But by doing various things to that, I can get it to partially hold up there. And it's a really difficult glaze to use and not cheap. That's a lot of tin oxide at a ridiculous price falling on the. This piece was used on the cover of the book that was a monograph that was made for the touring show, which came here to Adelaide. And this is an example of me putting this very tricky glaze over the top of other glazes and then coming through to create a graduating effect. At the time, the touring show started moving around Australia in 2009. There'd been a huge drought, which up at Cherryville at the moment, it doesn't seem plausible that it ever happened. We've had so much rain, but the lake Lake Alexandrina that I grew up next to on the farm was 2/3 of it dried up. The salt pans that were on the hinterland of our farm, were shining salt and surfaces were cracked like that. There was a lovely thing in nature to take hold of it and then work my way towards getting an artistic resolution or statement out of it. The Coorong was a boyhood paradise. Hunting, shooting and fishing. I killed a lot of ducks, I caught a lot of fish. And I used a lot of guns. I have to confess. However, I've reformed. It was that life. It was what that world was. All of us were members of the local gun club, and I had an uncle who was a very, very famous deadeye or crack shot. It was in the family, and we went down to the Coorong, which was it was hard to get in there. People didn't know where it was. We had old boats hidden away in the reeds and pushed up on the banks, and we got them out and touched up the bottom with hessian and tar and went fishing in these things with a kerosene lantern in the middle of the Coorong in 30 knots of breeze in the middle of the night. However, it would dry up, and it was an image in my head. I remember going there on one occasion, and pretty much most of the Coorong that I knew was just salt pan. And this was an interpretation, what you can do with the glaze. This thing's called Coorong Sketchbook. And yes, I suppose I always did want to be a painter, so I had a go at it. And this was a series of scenes that I thought captured my Coorong years and Coorong experiences. And actually, it looks even better the way those even better. I've got to have a think about this. Okay. This was in the touring show. It was one of the works that attracted a lot of attention. And it's called Edge of the Day. Well, you saw where the idea came from. The tricky part about this one is you've got to, in ceramics, always be prepared for the unexpected. I have no idea how the moon got there. None at all. And I pulled it out of the kiln the first time. Oh, no, hang on. And there it is. Reed talk. I spent a lot of time wading through reeds, often chasing lost cattle. Okay. This piece is famous for one particular thing, and I love showing off about it. It's owned by Elton John. Unfortunately, Elton doesn't often hang on to things for a long time. He enjoys them for a couple of years and they go back into the auction room. He's still got this one. Okay, now this was a certain period of my work was coming to an end here, and this was about a glaze running. On this side, oh, I've only got one, sorry, I misrepresented myself. But on the other side of that form, it has square ends, by the way, the drip didn't quite touch the black. So if you turn it around, it's like an action work. They're quite big. Too big for most people's homes. You know, my attitude is, well, if it doesn't fit, get another home. God knows there's plenty of them. Okay, so now this is pretty much towards the end of these. I'm just going to show you the other side of it because I do play a compositional game. I'm not going to go into it at great length, but I do things in an almost harmonic way with size, colour and movement of the surface. These high-walled hanging bowls are enormously popular. They have to be very, very nice inside. That's, you know, people are going to look over the edge and, ooh, you know. So, and this one, you saw the ones earlier on that were pretty tight. These are getting much looser, much freer now as I go along. I seem to sell one in every exhibition I have, so there's a few of them going to be out there. Well, I was asked to be in an exhibition called Still Life. And I wasn't famous for my still lifes at the time. In fact, I'd never made one. But I had a go, and I got quite a kick out of it when I started to, to get in the swing of it. And, a certain Italian painter springs to mind. I read up on Morandi and looked into Morandi very closely. One of the fascinating things I discovered towards the end of his life, he actually started painting the objects before he started doing the painting. He changed the surfaces when he wanted to. And then, so now here, okay, you can only just go so far with changing glazes, so I changed the clay. And the clay is it's black clay, it's fairly high in iron and manganese, and it's causing the surfaces to move like that. And the base is lily pilly. Okay, now some current work. This is called Cool Change. It's a fairly substantial piece. It's in Western Australia at the moment. You can see it on the website of Linton and Kay Gallery in Perth. They take credit cards, by the way. This piece you've just seen, it's been out here in the 60 touring show. These touring exhibitions and theme exhibitions are a real nuisance because you've got to step out of your comfort zone and do something, and it doesn't always come off. In fact, it's only about a 50-50 chance it's going to come off, and you might end up showing a work that's well below your proper level of capabilities. Now, a touring show, it's just got to be stunning, and it's going to cost time and effort to make it, and it's going to disappear, in this case, for nearly 5 years while it wanders around Australia. And so you really, but it is well worth doing. I'm not saying it's not worth doing, but it's one of those sort of things that you have to do to survive in this business. And it's where all the effort, all the idea and all the cost lobs on the back of the artist. These are two really quite large pieces in Western Australia. This piece was shown at, it's now in Manila. This piece was shown last May in Sydney. These ovoid forms I've now really become very fond of because I've got this play composition going on between the ovoid form and then pouring the glaze on and getting the curves. So it's a different game of visual tension. I can give you a half-hour lecture on visual tension if you want. This was the last show that was a very important, almost seminal work exhibition at Sabre Gallery in Sydney. And many of you will know Grant Hancock. The sand was Grant's idea. It was actually Grant's really big moment. He spread out sand on the studio floor, can you imagine, out there on Unley Road? And we did that. Now, that seems to be the end of the road. And I'm just going to be... How are we going for time? Okay. I've been batting on here for a while. Any questions? Yes, okay.
When you talk about the failures, is that like a technical failure, like cracks or whatever, and it just has to go? Or is it actually, which is probably more interesting to talk about, aesthetic failure? And how do you make judgments, when it's so wubby, sort of inspiring?
How do you
say, oh, this one's good, but those
Oh, it's bad,
so
yeah.
good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a good question and it's good because it's hard to answer. Okay, it's the feel of it. It's the vibe. But you are looking for something and you've trained yourself over many years to look for it. Now, I mentioned visual tension before. Now, what you learn about in Japanese art is negative space, the unused space. Now, the idea of negative space came as a hell of a shock in the 1860s with the touring exhibition of Japanese art that travelled around Europe. Gave rise to all sorts of things, including the Mikado. But this idea of, first of all, the long format, the use of black, real black, and the untouched negative space that had been left alone. So if I'm looking at one of those pieces of mine with the glaze occurring on it, and some of it's fallen off and some of it hasn't, yeah, there is a thing where the accidental thing is just a disaster, not good. And then there's another thing where you might see positive and negative space, and you might detect in your thinking a kind of harmonic about it. Large, small, very tight cracking, broader cracking. Now, I got quite good at being able to achieve both by the thickness of the glaze I put on. So when I did that panel, the three panels, according to the thickness of the glaze, I could get the tight and the very broad cracking at the bottom. I got that much control of it. It was if I went back to do one tomorrow, I'd basically have to go back and start again. It took me 2 or 3 years to get it, working. And once you stop it, there's a whole lot of things in ceramics like that. You move on from something. Oh, I can always go back and do that. And no, you can't. Somehow or other, the tuning's gone. But answering your question properly, you learn and you think and you watch and you get an idea that some works and some doesn't. That's where you become the artist and not just the manufacturer. Bit of a long-winded answer, sorry. Ask me a quick question, short one. Yep, here we are.
I'm just wondering about your...
Here, I'm going to do this. Here we are.
Just wondering about your technique of making. Are you like coil building or is it slabs? Yeah.
Okay, yes, it is coil building. Now, the coil building is overlooked and forgotten. It's something you do in a night class at the beginning and that's it after that. Now, I thought, coil building was for, odd folk. It was something you did and moved on from. And then I became a thrower. and worked for years and years with the potter's wheel and developed all sorts of variations on the potter's wheel and taught lots of people to throw. They made a video for the distance education program at ANU, and a video of me throwing. Now, I had, from various different sources, picked up a range of throwing techniques that went all the way back to Bennett's pottery back here in Adelaide, and then down to the more sophisticated working with Les Blake, learning all the tricks of porcelain throwing, and then Japanese throwing styles that I picked up from Shiga Shigeo when I worked for him for a couple of weeks at a demonstration thing where I stood next to him and prepared clay. He was fussy too. So I got all this package thing going, and then I did this video, and I, standing in an airport queue, waiting, to get to the counter, and someone says to me, "Oh," taps me on the shoulder, "I know you. You taught me throwing." I said, "Did I?" "Yeah, I was in New Zealand. We had a video." Oh, okay, right. But so throwing was, what I'm trying to tell you was I was really proud of my throwing skills. And we all were, weren't we, Pete? Then I got to a point where artistically I could not go forward by that technique. I couldn't get the range of forms I wanted. There was slab building, but over a certain size, slab buildings with most clays is really difficult. Slip casting, no, too industrial, couldn't handle it. So I started coil building, and really got good at it. I can roll a metre-long coil perfectly round in 10 seconds. And I've had people try and compete with me with an extruder, the extruding coils. I can beat them every time, and I don't have to clean up afterwards. The forms and the process I get time to think as I go up. The drying's progressive, and that can be troublesome in summer. But a particular feature of the clay I use is it can be redampened if it just gets a bit away from you. Not too far away, but you can put wet cloth on it and chamois cloth and then continue on. And you can build a hell of a strong structure. They have to be. They're big and they're heavy. They may have 3 firings. They're probably almost certainly going to have 2. So it's a pretty robust exercise. But when I'm teaching a workshop, I have to explain to people that my coil building is not what you think coil building is. It's a different sort of a process. You can get quite a large form in place that is still movable, so that I can do quite a bit of shaping of it, and I'm fond of these days of releasing the tension that is inherently in there because of the way you've made it. I like to get up to the top edge and let the tension go so the piece floats off. And anything to get it up, I do these little things to make the piece look like it's floating. And I just think it's a more generous aesthetic outcome for the piece. That was another long answer. Okay. Now, I think we're pretty close to time, aren't we? You're tapping it, thank you. I'm just going to put on a video that was made here at the JamFactory. It was made in 2011. It's 22 minutes long, so I'm not going to go all the way through. We'll go about 6 minutes into it. It was made by a man called Lindsay Smith, who was a talented and very capable filmmaker. That poor bloke fell on very, very hard times, very difficult time, and a few of us in the art world have given him work to keep him going, and he has a really unusual talent, as you'll very quickly see. He can make pretty ordinary pots look quite interesting. Well, thank you all for coming. This is sort of where I think we need to bring it to an end, but it gives another dimension to just the stills that you were looking at. And I suppose one way of winding up is to say that none of the things you've been looking at would have been possible without the JamFactory. It was a bit of a survival course, but I benefited immensely from it. Thank you all very much for coming along today. I hope you've enjoyed it.